Hamilton hosts a quiz game for the all clued up. But first on Anglia, we go in search of clues as to the character of Wivenhoe in Essex. It's the village show.
One of the most quaintly melodious-sounding titles in the history of Victorian enterprise was the Tendring Hundred Railway Company. It was set up to build a line from Colchester to Clacton, and the little port of Wivenhoe was a stop on the way. It prospered from the day the first train steamed in, May the 8th, 1863. There was freight, such as sprats from the sea, oysters from the river. There were the wealthy yacht owners and their crews who found it convenient to commute from London. These days, what goods there are go by road, and people commute mainly for business. The electric trains make Wivenhoe an attractive riverside dormitory for Colchester and the city. There are some who survey the spread of Wivenhoe and claim that the place is a town and not a village anymore. But there are others who say that they're not concerned with labels or definitions. Wivenhoe has been a village for centuries, and what's more, it still feels like one, especially the bit that's piled up around the river's edge. Just a few yards from the water, beyond the church, is the home of David and Noreen Russell. He's retired from a life managing machinery in the construction industry. Nowadays he's engaged in construction for pleasure. In a well-equipped workshop in the garden, he builds and maintains steam engines. It's a form of compensation for the sad day at work when he had to let steamrollers give way to diesels, though it was the prospect of working with steam which had lured him into the business in the first place. But it's boats which fill his shed, not road rollers, and David and Noreen's little fleet ply the waters at the bottom of the street.
Are you giving up your seat to me?
Yes, I'm giving
Madam,
up your seat.
I am obliged. Can I come aboard, Skipper?
Come aboard.
Wow! Is this wonderful? Oh! Well, thanks. Now you tell me I'm steering. Oh, this is wonderful! How am I doing? Doing fine. Ahoy! What I can't fathom then is why you went maverick and became an enthusiast for steam as applied to the water.
Ah, because that's easy to explain. Because I became a boat builder, you see, and I started restoring these old derelict boats, you see, and I thought it'd be fun to put a steam engine in rather than a motor.
I understand.
Easy as that. And of course, having worked with steam just after the war, I got thoroughly into it.
Well, so what was the first one you actually built?
Well, this is the first one we did. This was lying derelict up behind the quay here. And ultimately I managed to get hold of it, and I repaired it and then built this engine.
Magnificent. And is this your own design of engine?
Well, no, the bottom is a Stuart Turner petrol engine.
Really? So you've actually taken a petrol engine and,
yes,
as it were, turned it respectable.
That's right, yes. and that's my own top, you see. And look how we're going to hit somebody.
Oh, it's magnificent. It's a sweet sounding thing, and of course, like all steam engines, a sweet smelling thing.
Ah, that's the whole thing, yeah. Yes, rather. We want a bit more pressure on the gas.
When you mess about in boats on the River Colne, you should always allow for the people who are bigger than you and who carry more clout. What's more, they're not on the water for fun. Wivenhoe is one of the river's ports and has been for years. These days, the wharf can cope with ships up to 76 metres long. Anything bigger would likely overwhelm the warehousing and storage capacity on the site. For most of its life, Wivenhoe Port was concerned mainly with the import of timber, but a wider range of cargoes comes through now from a wider range of countries. Different materials breed different handling techniques. The persistent agility of a mechanical terrier for loose coal, the steady exertion of sheer pull to shift polythene parcels of bricks. Whatever the load, Wivenhoe generally tends to be happier while it's still on the water or confined to the company's compound. When a load takes to the road, village people mourn the riverside railway tracks abandoned years ago. But commerce and comfort are forced to compromise. Pat Alston is a director of the port. Where does the stuff come from and where does it go to?
Comes from, mainly it's transshipped from the Europort, Rotterdam and
So that means big cargoes go into Rotterdam, they're broken down, put into little ships,
and then brought across
and then come to you.
To the coast of England. We have timber coming in from Scandinavia, the bricks which come from Germany, Scandinavia, Belgium, Holland, France. The animal feeds, which will come originally from America and South America, that also comes from the continent. Steel from Poland and Germany, hardwoods, pine, etc. from Portugal and Spain.
Well, so much where the stuff comes from. What about where it goes to from here?
It goes all over the United Kingdom.
And since the coastline of Britain is dotted with ports of all sorts, competition is keen. Meanwhile, it has to be recorded that some local people would prefer the port to pass on and the ships to pass by. While most of the shipping which Wivenhoe sees is cargo traffic, weaving away along the deep channel in the river's middle, there is still the odd local fishing boat, trawling a living from the sea 8 miles or so off the coast between Clacton and Felixstowe. Wivenhoe was always famous for sole and for sprats eaten by the working class in the old days and known as weaver's beef. Now Richard Jacobs and his mate land what they can, happy to combine a reasonable living with a love of the business and a passing fondness for fish. Wivenhoe plays host to boats and ships of many kinds, but it was once the birthplace of ships and boats too. The last of the yards closed in 1986. The order book had grown thinner, the credits stopped, and so did the sound of riveters and welders, leaving a wasteland of concrete and corrugated iron, and memories of what they built here. The old house is beyond saving, they say, so it and the rest of the yard will go, leaving a prime site full of potential for a smart riverside development. Before they start work, the architects and planners might do well to raise their eyes to the existing waterfront. They'll see an act which is hard to follow, but Wivenhovians hope it's not impossible. Though the shipyards have gone, you can still find boats being worked on by patient-seeming people who apparently don't mind sloshing paint on instead of actually taking to the water. There's one thing to be said for sailing a paintbrush, though. When the sun's over the yard arm, or wherever, the pub is only the length of a gangplank away. Wivenhoe is better served than most places by a good local history book, closely researched, carefully written by Nicholas Butler, who knows most of the stories. Well, Nicholas, tell me a little of the illustrious occupants of the house in which we're currently standing.
Well, the most illustrious occupant of this house, of course, was John Martin Harvey, the actor-manager. He was actually born in a house in the shipyard, which was later demolished. He lived here as a child for some time, and he talks about this house in his autobiography.
Did he like the house?
In his autobiography, he says it had a vague sense of terror. He had a sort of Wordsworthian feeling about it.
You mean, in other words, he's getting quite the reverse of the sort of feelings we get from this place.
I know.
It's lovely.
It's a jolly, friendly family house on the quay, but it wasn't for him, or at any rate he pretended it wasn't. I'm not quite certain which.
Wherein lay these vague terrors? Could he pinpoint them at all?
No, I don't think he could, except next door there's a house called the Granary, and in his time there was an actual granary there, and some years before the Harveys moved into this house, a serving girl attached to the family who lived here had drowned herself in a cistern in the granary, and that seemed to perhaps be a focal point of the terrors, real or imagined.
It must also have been a fairly boisterous house, and I say that because, of course, next door there is a pub, which presumably in the old days was a haunt of seafaring men.
Yes, it was. In the old days, the Rose and Crown over there was divided up into compartments, and in the bow front, facing the quay, the captains used to have their special room with their special seats and their special mugs. But there was a tap room at the back of the building, and that was opposite Martin Harvey's bedroom window. And he used to look down and see the red curtains and the lights beyond the tap room, and hear the seamen singing their old songs.
Their rough shanties.
Yes.
Shades of Treasure Island, in fact.
Yes, well, that's exactly what he compared it to. It reminded him of Treasure Island.
Perhaps they ought to rename the place the Admiral Benbow.
There's only a handful of seafaring men left in Wivenhoe now, and about as many again whose full-time business is to do with boats. Some occupy ancient buildings on the quay, littered with the flotsam of their trade. This one had Australian army horses stabled in it during World War I. There are dusty relics of grand occasions when brand new yachts for the really rich took to the water for the first time. But you don't waste bubbly on a repair job, the sort of work which they mostly do here now. A rich and famous yachtsman was Arthur Ransom, who wrote sailing stories for children. Hugh Brogan teaches at the nearby University of Essex and knows as much about Ransom as anybody.
What is the connection, if any, between Arthur Ransom and Wivenhoe?
I suppose the most important connection is me, because I'm his biographer and I live here. But he was a yachtsman on the East Coast in the late 1930s, and also a little after the war. And he kept a boat at the anchorage at Pin Mill on the Orwell, and he sailed up and down the Suffolk and Essex coast. He brought his boat up the Colne, the Nancy Blackett up the Colne several times.
But he seems able to convey, as few other people are, the fun of sailing, the excitement of being in a boat driven by the wind.
Yes.
And yet, you have disclosed to me that you're not a sailing person yourself.
That's not entirely true. I love going sailing. What I don't love is all the bother of owning a boat. And it is a great deal of bother. The people in Wivenhoe who own boats spend, as far as I can remember, most of their time either tiring or painting or repairing or sailing their boats, and I simply don't have the leisure.
You're not tempted at all, even surrounded by these lovely things?
Yes, I am tempted, but I'm tempted by a great many things, and the Bible teaches us we must resist temptation.
Have you ever owned a boat of any sort?
Well, I owned a punt, and the punt, I think it was the punt that put me off owning a yacht, because a punt takes a great deal of maintenance, and it's the simplest of all boats. And if you find, as I found, that you spent more time maintaining the punt than you did punting her, then clearly boat owning is not for you.
It only takes a few boats and the assorted ironmongery attached to them to make a magnet for the artistically inclined. Yet, strangely, at Wivenhoe today, they've turned their backs on the river and the salty air. Instead, they've brought nature indoors, stuck it on a table, and hemmed it in with easels and brushes. These part-time amateur students are in good company. There are distinguished connections between Wivenhoe and the art fraternity. Dennis Worth Miller moved here and became the first living artist to sell a work to the Queen. Another settler was the man who did the book jackets for James Bond. But art was a job for them. This is for fun, the sheer pleasure of seeing and translating life by hand and eye. Wivenhoe's most famous day, the one which got it into the record books, was just like this one. Warm, calm and with a perfect sky. It was April the 22nd, 1884. Just after 9:15 in the morning, and just after high tide, there was a low rumbling sound. Boats heaved up in the water, and so did the buildings on shore. It was an earthquake, and Wivenhoe got the worst of it. Nobody was killed, but lots were bruised, and the place was badly knocked about, all in a tremor lasting no more than 6 or 7 seconds. A lot of Wivenhovians couldn't afford the repairs, and a fund was set up to help. It raised £10,000. If an earthquake comes again, it would be tragic to see gems like these take a hammering, though there are some buildings for which it would be hard to shed a tear. The enterprise has merit, but the architecture doesn't. Meanwhile, since 1884, the insurance men have been at it, and the place is underpinned with policies. Of course, there's more of it now, beyond the riverside and up the hill. Wivenhoe has one distinction which it surely can't be sharing with anywhere else, a pillar box pair like Laurel and Hardy. But should we keep quiet in case the post office takes one away? No, it's cheaper to leave them as they are. The parish church of St. Mary the Virgin could tell a tale of how, for instance, a 14th century rector wasn't above a spot of poaching, hunting rabbits with his ferret and going after pheasant with a bow and arrow. The court might have frowned, but the parishioners didn't, and nor did they on a more recent patron of the graveyard.
This is a son of Wivenhoe they're all quite fond of telling you about. Philip Sainty, boat builder, bigamist, bankrupt. He also did do business in great waters. He was a smuggler. He built very fast, sharp, snapper-diddle boats which would outrun the revenue cutters of the day. And what's more, he could be certain that they would continue to outrun them because, alongside those smuggling boats, he was building in the same yard revenue cutters. Sainty's reputation for building fast boats spread far beyond the waters of Essex and got to the ears of the Marquis of Anglesey, a hero of Waterloo. He was after a fast yacht, so he came looking for Sainty. When he got to Wivenhoe, though, Sainty was absent, in jail, caught at last. So the Marquis had to pull a string or two to get him out. Him and his crew, because Sainty insisted, no crew, no boat. So more strings were pulled, the boat was duly built. She was called the Pearl, proceeded to beat everything in sight, and there she is, the emblem of the village of Wivenhoe in the village sign.
The whale, which flies whichever way the wind blows above Guy Taplin's workshop, is a curious sort of totem for him to adopt. And so, for that matter, is the figure made of sticks who watches the world go by and seems none too happy with what passes. But the one-legged bird is bang on. Ask Guy what his job is, and he says simply, "I make wooden birds." He came to the craft from being a ladies' hairdresser, meat porter and lifeguard. Craft isn't the word he'd use, though. He's got too much respect for craftsmen. So it's art. His technique, he says, is just to take a block of wood and take everything off that doesn't look like a bird. And what's left sells well in local galleries, and Edinburgh, and London. The words and music of Gilbert and Sullivan join Guy Taplin's wail in the night air over Wivenhoe. They often do. G&S a staple fare for local singers. Old Gilbert anticipated the compliment too. He had a boat built here. What's odd is that a man with such a poetic turn of mind should give it a name which sounds like something you'd clean drains with. He called it Chloris.
Which is why she has no one to match them in her city. Good, well done.
The Nottage Institute for the Furtherance of Nautical Skill, says the programme. The benefactor was a Victorian military man and keen sailor, Captain Charles Nottage. Courses are comprehensive, starting with the elementary.
Low pressure on the upward surface of the wing and high pressure underneath, which creates lift. And it's the same principle used in a sail. When the air goes past that curved shape of the sail, then there's low pressure on the full-bellied side and high pressure on the concave side, which actually sucks that sail along and therefore the boat along.
And when you know how it goes, you can learn where it goes in navigation classes.
We're going to call a latitude.
You can even learn how to build your own boat, translating lines on paper into bits of wood. What they have on the stocks are pretty little boats, clinker-built dinghies, very traditional. But they're sophisticated enough in construction to take 2 years of your spare time. That's not a commitment you take on lightly. It's more than just carpentry, though a way with wood is something of an advantage. There's cooking involved as well. The wood has to be stewed for a long time to make the fibres soft, so the timber is pliable enough to conform to what the design requires. Even with this crude kind of cuisine, you can have too many cooks. The secret is to have just the right number. And at the end of the effort, there's one small dinghy, the marine equivalent of a snack. But for the builder, it's a banquet. Bon voyage, little boat.
Listen, that'll bend in there cold anyway.
One of the best friends of the Nottage, and Wivenhoe if it comes to that, is Bill Ellis. He's seen changes round here which have made some people angry. He tends to be rueful, yet philosophical.
Well, as you know, there has been shipbuilding going on in Wivenhoe since, well, 1528 is the first recorded records we have, first written records, and probably for about 1,000 years altogether, shipbuilding and boat building. And now, unfortunately, there's nothing but dinghy building. The 2 yards which were in Wivenhoe have both now been scheduled for residential development. The one at the western end of the town, looking up the river, has possibly got a couple more years to go, I suppose, before something happens, but there is outline planning permission on that now. And looking downstream to the other yard, which was, until 3 years ago, James W. Cook and Company Limited. That company went into liquidation in 1986, and there is strong talk now that that is going to be a residential development. And then below that, about 50 metres downstream, there is a mooted programme for a tidal surge barrier by the National Rivers Authority, which will come right across from the high ground on the Fingering-Hoe side to the high ground on the Wivenhoe side, with 2 concrete dolphins in the middle of the river with gates to combat tidal surges.
Which means that Wivenhoe, as is, can never be again. What is the general feeling about it?
Well, I think there are various camps in the town. As you say, it will never be quite the same again, and they're all contentious matters, and people are very concerned, and there's quite a deal of controversy over the matter. Only time will tell, I suppose. If the residential developments have got to come, one can only hope they will be done as sympathetically as possible, in keeping with the town and its very old heritage and environment. And with the barrier, one can only hope that it will not be too obtrusive and will indeed hold back any tidal surges which might be coming in the future.
Loyal Wivenhovians, native and immigrant, defend the place and debate every issue affecting it. It's home, and well worth the saving.
was silenced by